All right, welcome back fellow film students and focus learners to today's Explainer. Today we're breaking down the work of a man who didn't just compose music for films, he fundamentally rewired how cinema communicates. We are, of course, talking about the absolute legend Indian composer Ilaiyaraaja. Now this is the story of a barefoot boy from the rural village of Panayapuram. He absorbed ancient Tamil folk rhythms, totally mastered Western classical harmony, and then embarked on a 50-year journey that took him literally all the way to debuting a symphony with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra in London. If you want to understand how music can operate as a film's unseen protagonist, well, you're in exactly the right place.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our masterclass syllabus for today. First, we'll look at the architecture of a new music, then music as inner psychology, followed by deep dive case studies on Manaragam and Pithamaggan. Then we'll cover the director-composer synergy and wrap it all up with a global symphonic legacy.
Starting off with Section 1, Architecture of a New Music. To truly grasp Ilaiyaraaja's genius, we've got to look at the architectural foundation of his music. Because he didn't just write catchy melodies, he achieved this unprecedented, highly technical fusion of two completely distinct musical worlds. Let's break this down. On one side, we have the Western symphonic tradition. At its core, this tradition is all about exploring musical time. It relies heavily on harmony, complex counterpoint, and the architectural buildup of tension and release. Now, on the other side, we have the Carnatic and Indian tradition, which is an exploration of melodic space. It relies on the raga, which, isn't just a scale. It's almost like a living entity with its own very distinct emotional color and personality. And what makes Ilaiyaraaja's work so historically significant is that he didn't just mix these styles like a mashup. No, he synthesized them. He made it so both could operate simultaneously without one ever subordinating the other.
He actually developed this unique grammar of synthesis through a really specific musical education. He absorbed Tamil folk melodies organically in his home village. That was essentially his mother tongue. Later on, in Madras, he intensely studied both Carnatic music and Western classical music, analyzing heavyweights like Bach, Beethoven, and Mozart under Master Dhanraj. Because he came to these classical structures as a listener and a lover of sound first, he wielded Western harmony with an immigrant's intense precision. He literally did the unthinkable. He took the deep emotional personalities of Carnatic ragas and placed them directly inside the complex harmonic environments and chord progressions of Western orchestration.
Moving on to Section 2. Music as inner psychology.
So we have this groundbreaking musical architecture, right? But how is it actually weaponized to tell a story on screen? Well, this brings us to the core of our film analysis, how Ilaiyaraaja uses soundscapes to track inner psychology. For the film students watching, let's quickly redefine a familiar term, the leitmotif. In Western traditions, say, with Wagner, a leitmotif is a recurring musical theme associated with a character or an idea. But in Ilaiyaraaja's hands, a leitmotif is never just a static character jingle. It's a transformable musical idea. Instead of just swapping out a melody when a character changes, he uses harmonic accumulation. He alters the chords, the rhythm, or the underlying instruments while keeping that core melody totally intact to beautifully map a character's psychological maturation.
So the crucial point here is that Ilaiyaraaja's background score acts as a completely independent narrative entity. It operates as an invisible timeline. It speaks when dialogue simply cannot, and it often reveals the protagonist's true feelings long before the character is consciously aware of them, or honestly, before the screenplay even explicitly states them. He is literally scoring the unseen.
Let's see this in action with Section 3, Case Study on Manaragam.
Let's look at how this plays out visually and aurally in director Mani Ratnam's 1986 film Manaragam. This is an absolute masterclass in scoring urban psychological distance and unspoken grief. Just take a look at Divya's profound emotional isolation on one side, contrasted heavily with her new husband Chandrakumar's physical touch on the other. They share physical proximity, sure, but Ilaiyaraaja makes absolutely certain we know they exist in entirely different sonic worlds. Instead of giving them some warm, sweeping love theme, he scores their early companionship with a descending, unresolved three-note piano cell. It doesn't announce a relationship at all. It explicitly screams the lack of one.
If we actually track this motif across the film, we see how the harmonic progression literally acts as Divya's character arc. On the train journey, it's just that cold, unresolved piano cell. When we see flashbacks of her tragic past, the exact same melody returns, but suddenly strings are added and the pitch is shifted higher, telling us she is incredibly mournful and numb.
Finally, at the climax of the film, when she realizes her true feelings, the core melody doesn't change, but the underlying tone shifts in a massive modal pivot. The harmony finally resolves. The music goes from cold to mournful to warm, completing her psychological maturation without a single line of exposition. It's stunning.
And this brilliantly illustrates the power of scoring the subtext. In this particular scene, Chandra Kumar formally proposes to Divya, but as the camera cuts to her face, Ilaiyaraaja makes a breathtaking choice. He plays the motif of her dead former lover, Manohar. We are hearing the proposal, but we are feeling the heavy memory of the past. By playing the quote-unquote wrong motif, Ilaiyaraaja perfectly captures Divya's internal confusion and emotional paralysis. The music completely bypasses the dialogue to tell us the actual raw truth of the scene.
Let's pivot to our next case study, Section 4, Pithamagan.
We are moving into a completely different sonic environment now. We're going from the repressed, highly educated urban setting of Munaragam to a world of raw, pre-linguistic emotion in director Bala's 2003 film Pithamagan. Here, we see the protagonist Chithan, raised in profound isolation within a graveyard. He exists entirely outside the framework of language and society. And because he cannot articulate verbally, Ilaiyaraaja gives him a simple pentatonic folk flute motif. This elemental sound becomes Chithan's only form of articulation, and really his only true companionship.
But you know what makes this score truly exceptional? It's what Ilaiyaraaja chooses not to play. In the graveyard scenes, the composer relies heavily on the sonic void. Because he has conditioned the audience so well to expect a motif, suddenly withholding it and leaving us with only the natural ambient sounds of crickets and wind creates an immensely powerful compositional statement. The silence itself becomes heavy. It represents Chittan's pre-linguistic stillness, right before the sheer noise of a violent world comes crashing into him.
And once again, we get to see the motif mutate to reflect deep character development. Chithan's simple folk flute motif starts off representing his pre-linguistic isolation. When he finally makes a friend, that motif warms up with orchestral strings, signaling this beautiful emotional awakening. But as tragedy strikes and he's dragged violently into society, that very same motif is overtaken by dark polyrhythmic percussion. It darkly transforms into an auditory representation of his descent into rage and absolute loss. The pure innocence of the melody is technically still in there, but it is completely suffocated by the heavy, dissonant orchestration of what he's been forced to become.
This brings us to Section 5, the director-composer synergy.
Now, when a composer is crafting unseen narratives of this magnitude, it fundamentally changes the collaborative dynamic. Let's look at how Ilaiyaraaja's music forces directors to completely rethink their visual staging. The synergy here is just fascinating. With Mani Ratnam, we see extreme visual restraint. He uses static shots and physical distance, explicitly relying on Ilaiyaraaja's score to fill that emotional gap. Director Bala, on the other hand, utilizes raw physical blocking that ties directly into the rhythmic, primal energy of the score. In the film Guna, director Santana Bharati literally compartmentalizes his framing to match the obsessive, highly dissonant musical loops Ilaiyaraaja creates. In Vetramaran, he contrasts his chaotic, handheld realism right against the score's unstable musical motifs. The music isn't just laid over the visuals in post-production. The visual staging is built from the ground up to accommodate the unseen narrative of the music.
Finally, let's wrap up with Section 6, a global symphonic legacy. Let's zoom out for a second and look at the macro impact of Ilaiyaraaja's work on the global stage. This is a man whose genius absolutely refused to be contained by geographic or genre boundaries. Following this timeline, the sheer scale of his barrier breaking is staggering. In 1976, he introduces complex Western orchestration to Tamil folk music with Anakali. Fast forward a decade, he's fusing Carnatic ragas with Bach partitas. By 1993, he shatters a massive historical ceiling, becoming the very first Asian composer to debut a full symphony with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. He followed that up with the first Indian oratorio in 2006, and in 2025, debuted his English classical symphony Valiant right in London. He proves definitively that musical boundaries between East and West are basically just historical constructs waiting to be dismantled.
And he did all of this while maintaining an output that is almost unmatched in human history. Over 50 years' career, Ilaiyaraaja has composed over 8,500 songs and provided the absolute lifeblood for over 1,500 film scores. Let that sink in. This is a level of prolific, sustained genius that defies comprehension. And every single one of those thousands of compositions was an opportunity to connect human hearts and meticulously chart the depth of human emotion.
Which leaves us with this final thought. If a master like Ilaiyaraaja can take a single melodic line and evolve it to capture the entire psychological lifespan of a character, what other unseen narratives are we totally missing when we watch a film? What are we missing when we forget to truly listen to the silence? The next time you sit down to watch one of these cinematic masterpieces, don't just look at the screen. Listen closely to the invisible storyteller. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.